John, I loved our conversation today with Pamela Wilson, who is an absolute expert at content marketing and digital marketing. She's a published author of 2 books, and even she shared with us that one of her books was used as a textbook in a collegiate level class.
Yeah, no doubt. We talk about how digital marketing has really evolved, right? From offline marketing initially to now digital marketing. It's gone through its teenage phases, and we can now see a glimpse of the future. And she shares with us some of the secrets that are going on, what entrepreneurs and small businesses should be thinking about. And I really love when we go through the 7 elements of how to create really good content, whether that be podcasts or writing or whatever it may be. So really look forward to this episode. Here's Pamela Wilson from Pamela Wilson Consulting. Pamela, welcome to the Entrepreneurs United podcast. Excited to have you on here today. I know that you do a lot in digital marketing. You're also an executive coach, and you help entrepreneurs learn how to develop their digital platforms to energize their businesses, potentially make more income or revenue streams. So we look forward to diving deeper into that. Before we get to that, though, can you talk to us a little bit about your roots as an entrepreneur yourself and how you developed the skill sets to which you help entrepreneurs with today?
I am celebrating 30 years in business this year. So I started way back, and I've been in the marketing space the entire time. So as you can imagine, I've seen huge changes in the marketing space over all these years. And about, I guess, 12 years ago or so, I started seeing everything that was happening in the online space, and I wanted to get in there. I wanted to be able to serve audiences that weren't necessarily in my geographic area. And I wanted to reach people who needed what I had, no matter where they were in the world. So I started slowly but surely pivoting my design and marketing agency to be more of an online business. And by 2014, the pivot was complete, and I had my online business, and I kind of shuttered my offline agency and focused on that. And it has been such an exciting time to be in this industry, because I have a theory that the online space is a little bit like a teenager. You know, do either of you have kids who are in their teenage years or have been in their teenage years? So you know, you're nodding. So you know
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. We both
Yeah. Just for anyone that's not seeing the video, they're nodding. So, so, you know, when they get to be about 17 or 18, you start to see these little glimpses of the kind of adult they're going to be. And my theory is that we're at that place with digital marketing and the online space. It's definitely gone through its awkward teenage years. Definitely. There's been a lot of, weirdness and a lot of snake oil sales people who've inhabited this space. But I feel like it's starting to mature, and we're starting to see glimpses of what it might look like down the line. And in the meantime, we have an opportunity to sort of set the stage and decide what the future is going to look like. So I think it's a really exciting time to be using digital marketing.
Love that. I'm certainly going to probe into what are the glimpses you see of where we're going, because that's certainly, to your point, when you start seeing where the ball is going, you can actually get there before others. That's a competitive advantage. So I want to dive into that a little bit. But first, though, a lot of entrepreneurs have to pivot their businesses. And you had to go through a pretty massive pivot of, I've learned this traditional offline agency means, and I now have to pivot to this online side. When did you make that pivot exactly? What year, I guess?
Yeah, I started in 2010 by developing an online course and setting up like an online website where people could find that course. I learned content marketing. I wrote a couple of books about content marketing because I was so fascinated by content marketing as a means to market what you had. And I still am a huge fan of content marketing. I think it's a great way to market your ideas, your methods, your product, your service. There's so much potential with content marketing, but I am not a writer. I did not start out as a writer, and I learned how to write content pretty competently. I was writing for some of the leaders in the content marketing industry by the time I finished. So that's why I wrote the books, because I felt like I need to share this with people, So I had to learn all of that, all of those new skills during that time. And by about 2014, I had really made that pivot. I mean, my online business income had replaced the offline business income. So I said goodbye to my last clients and the pivot was complete. So it was about 4 years total.
Okay. I guess a question that our audience may be asking is, why did you have to say goodbye to offline clients versus convert your offline clients to online clients?
I had a very different set of clients in the offline world. I was helping industry, I was helping institutions like universities, large corporations to communicate their marketing messages. And in the online space, I was helping individuals, individual business owners, small, very small business owners. So they were just two completely different groups. The products and services that I developed with my online business were serving a different kind of audience. So that's why I couldn't convert them. And I didn't have bandwidth or frankly desire to serve both of those kinds of clients at the same time. I wanted to be able to focus. Now, though, I sort of am serving both. So I now am doing some corporate consulting. So I have found a way to serve both of those kinds of clients. So it's been an evolution.
Pamela, what is the niche that you serve in the digital marketing space? What differentiates you?
So, like I said, I serve two different kinds of people. And I like to say that I kind of have old school marketing along with a lot of digital marketing expertise. So, it's kind of a 360-degree view of the marketing world and what you can do. I have a client right now that's a consulting client who is using my digital marketing skills to create qualified leads that they send to their sales team. So, they're using things like content marketing, email marketing, setting up landing pages on their site so that they can capture leads, and all of those digital marketing processes to send leads to the sales team. At the same time, they're doing a print newsletter, and I can help them with that. So that's the nice thing, is that some of my clients really are using both of these things. And I see that as a sign of maturity in the industry, that the industry is kind of went all digital for a while. A lot of businesses didn't want anything to do with print. And now I think because the print space is not as busy as it used to be, people are revisiting some of those things that I used earlier in my career. So I don't know if that's a niche, Rich, but
Okay.
I guess it would be that I can help you straddle both of those worlds.
And you'd said digital marketing to generate leads. Would you be open to sharing with us a piece of advice that all entrepreneurs might be able to take advantage of? And even a piece of advice you might even typically reserve for a paying client so our entrepreneur listeners can get a sample of you and maybe they'd want more.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll pull something from something I was working on just this morning for a consulting client. they it's very important to know your numbers. And as I said, I came from, kind of the offline marketing world where it was very difficult to track your results. We used to create printed pieces that would have little codes on them in the corner. And if somebody called in on a telephone, they would have to tell you what code was on their coupon so that you could track your results. I mean, it was almost impossible to know if what you were spending a lot of money on was actually helping your business. Nowadays, we have so much data. There's so much information that tells us what are people seeing on their way to becoming a customer, and is it working or is it not? But what I find is that sometimes people are tracking the wrong thing. So I had a client this morning that had put together this massive spreadsheet that had all of their lead magnets. And we all know what a lead magnet is, right?
Tell us.
Okay. Very briefly, for anyone who's not sure, a lead magnet is something that you sign up for on a web page that is a valuable piece of information that you are willing to give your email address in exchange for this lead magnet in order to
Got
get it, right?
Yep.
So it could be a video, it could be, a quick tutorial or something, but typically it's some kind of valuable information that you are willing to give an email to this company in order to get this lead magnet. So that's what a lead magnet does. And when you do it right, you create a lead magnet that is specifically designed for people who are in the process of making a buying decision. And you give them a piece of information that's going to help them move along that buying journey and become customers, right? So this consulting client had created a variety of lead magnets, a lot of lead magnets. And some were working, and they had a sense that some were not, but they weren't really sure. So I asked them to gather their numbers. And this is where you just have to know what numbers to really look at. So they had gathered their conversion rate. So this was the number of people who had hit a web page and opted into the lead magnet. So the number of people who saw the lead magnet offer and opted in to get that offer. And that's a great number to have. Don't get me wrong. It's great to know that. But it's just the start, because the most interesting number is how many of the people who got that lead magnet later on became customers. And that's actually the number that counts. You want to know how many people continued through the sales process, talked to the sales team, and signed up and became a customer. That's the interesting part. So they had some lead magnets that were getting a lot of people signing up for them, but they didn't turn into customers. Those people who signed up for the lead magnets didn't turn into customers. Then they had these other lead magnets that didn't have these super sexy opt-in conversion rates, right? But the people turned into customers at a really high rate. So that's what I would tell people. And that's probably way too geeky to follow on a podcast. But basically, you need to know what number to pay attention to. There are a lot of numbers in the digital marketing space that they're kind of ego driven. They're like good for your ego, Oh, I have lots of signups, or I have lots of people coming to my webinar, or I have a lot of people subscribe to my podcast, and that's great. But if you are using your podcast or your webinar or any of these things, if you're using them to actually turn people into customers, the number you need to track is how many people are turning into customers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't think that was too hard to follow at all.
Oh, good.
They were tracking number of hits on a page to number of email addresses they were collecting, where your recommendation is grab both number of hits on a page to customer conversion and number of email addresses from that page to customer conversion. Because at the end of the day, you're not collecting emails, you're trying to sell a product or a service.
And Rich,
I tried to take email addresses and deposit them in my bank account, and they wouldn't take them. So
it does remind me, though, Pamela, to on the finance side, one of my favorite sayings is, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. And I would love to come up with a digital marketing equivalent to that, right? Like website hits is vanity, web magnet leads is maybe sanity, but really conversion to customers at a high margin is king, or something like that, right?
We need to. We'll have to workshop the copy there, but
John could use some content help.
Yes, absolutely.
No, but it's a good first draft. I think you're heading in the right direction with that.
Look how positive she's being. I'd love to work with her. Tell me, what is the most common mistake that you find a small to mid-size entrepreneur makes, and not on the tracking numbers, what we just covered, but what is a digital marketing mistake that you just find yourself repeating yourself with people, because so often you see they do or don't do what?
Honestly, the biggest pet peeve that I have is website headlines. I cannot tell you how many times I have to tell people, don't use jargon, don't use too many words, and go for clear, not clever. Just say the thing at the top of the page. Don't try to be clever and, clickbaity or anything like that. Just like say the thing. People land on the page. Their first question is, am I in the right place? you need to give them a headline that lets them know that they're in the right place to get the information that they came to searching for, right? So create headlines that share what you do on that page. Now, it's a little different if we're talking about a podcast episode headline or a headline on a blog post or something like that. That might be a little different, but I'm seeing people on like services pages or, about pages sharing these headlines that are just you're just like those words together don't actually mean anything. So we need to create a headline that actually says something that makes sense here and make it short.
So what happens if you don't think in the common vernacular of your customer? What's the so what? Why do you need to be clear, not clever?
Here's the thing. I think this is a great way to remember it. You need to think that people are clicking on links and going to your web pages, and their first question is, am I in the right place? Am I in the right place or am I lost? Right? Because we've all gone to web pages where we're like, oh, this is not what I was looking for. Right? And so you click through and you want to know, did I land in the right place? The internet is a big and scary place. So that's the first question in people's minds. And that's why your headline has to answer that question. Yes, you are on the page where you're going to learn all about our services. We're going to share exactly what we do on this page. And you need to have a headline that reflects that.
Yeah, Pamela, it strikes me if we go back to your story. When I asked you the question, why didn't you just convert your offline customers to online customers? And your response, to paraphrase differently, was, well, this business was B2B and this business is B2C. And I wanted to make sure I was focused on knowing my customer. And if we put it in what you just said, if you had a website and the consumers are showing up there and you're talking about businesses and they'd be like, this is not the person for me, they'd leave. So I think what you're trying to say here is, A, you need to know your buyer persona. Like, who are you targeting so that when they show up on your website, they're like, oh, I'm finally home. This is exactly where I need to be. And we'll fill out the lead magnet, which will convert to a sale, which will be a high margin, and it kind of flows that way. So I'm assuming that's probably one of the things you start working with clients initially is, who's your buyer? Is that
Yeah.
fair?
Yes, absolutely. It's one of the things we go over early. And oftentimes they do know, they have a good handle on it, but for some reason, the way they're communicating with that prospective buyer is not landing. So that's a lot of what I'm doing. The people that I help in the consulting side of my business, oftentimes have gotten a start. They've got some digital marketing going and it's just not doing what they want it to do. They're sort of spinning the wheels in the right direction, but they're not seeing the results. So we go in and look at everything. We're looking at what's happening on your web pages, which lead magnets are converting. Do you even have a lead magnet that people are liking? And then when people sign up for that lead magnet, what are you sending them? How are you following up? Are you nurturing that connection? Are you helping them to get what they need in the moment they need it? All of that. And with all of the digital marketing tools that we have at our disposal now, it's not that difficult to kind of get a feel for what people need and when. But it's only if we pay attention to those things that we can figure out how to serve people. So it's a lot of just kind of, I think of it like if you were organizing a closet, you kind of have to take everything out of it and put it on the floor and say, all right, what are we dealing with here, right? So there's a lot of that at the beginning of an engagement. And what I find is clients are usually kind of relieved that somebody is willing to look at their mess in some cases and try to make sense of it and pull out what's working and optimize what's not. And I really enjoy the process.
Yeah, I love that. So, one of the challenges we see right now in digital marketing, you highlighted, which is there's just so much data. There's so many things. You're doing paid, you're doing SEO, you're doing social, you're doing there's so many things out there. So from a business perspective, an entrepreneurial perspective, knowing where to focus is difficult. Hiring a marketing person to work inside your company is also equally as difficult because you find that one person who's good at web design isn't necessarily good at social, isn't necessarily good at paid, isn't necessarily good at SEO, isn't necessarily good at content, so on and so forth. So how do you help businesses specifically Do you kind of provide a little bit of an assessment of their digital marketing status and say, okay, here's the top 3 things you need to be focused on, and then you help them find the right sources to do it? Or do you actually do it yourself, or do you have a firm of people that do it? Like, tell me a little bit more about how your business operates.
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. It's difficult to figure it out. And I think it's a matter of figuring out, well, first of all, I typically work in conjunction with an existing team. And in some cases, I help my client to either find the right contractor for something they need to get done or to hire a team member who will fill a need on the team. So I'm not doing the work myself. I say on my consulting page that I work side by side with your marketing team. So I'm a big believer in helping, I call them fledgling marketing teams. So this is my diplomatic way of saying, they've got some baby chops and they're learning and they're coming up in the world, and I help them to just get better at their jobs, right? So I'm a big believer in helping those team members to really step into their roles and become really skilled at what they do. And I really enjoy kind of mentoring people who work for the companies that I consult with. I do think at the beginning of that, though, you have to figure out, okay, what is actually working in your digital marketing, and what are we going to focus on optimizing so that we can make sure that we have the right people on the team to help you in those areas.
Okay, got it. I've been waiting about 20 minutes to ask you this question. You said something earlier, which was, look, digital marketing and online marketing is kind of past its teenage funky stage of trying to figure things out, is maturing a little bit, and we're starting to get a glimpse of where this is going. I would love to hear where this is going, and specifically, would love for you to kind of have entrepreneurs challenge a little bit themselves as they're listening to this, going, "Oh my gosh, I need to start doing more of that because I'm not doing any of that right now." Where are we going with this?
Yeah. Okay. So one way to look at it, thank you for your patience, first of all, John. 20 minutes is a long time to wait to ask a question. So one thing to think about this is that the digital marketing space really is it's as in a contrast to the space that I came from, where personalization and personal one-on-one contact and meeting in person and sales happening in person and all of that. The digital marketing space, I think for many of its early years, felt very impersonal. It felt very, you had like this screen between you and any other person, right? So one very obvious thing is that there are a lot of ways to personalize your connection with the client, right? Even just something as basic as adding someone's name to an email and using, collecting that name and then using it in your communication with your prospect. That's important. We've seen during these pandemic years how important Zoom is and how you can, do you guys remember? It was only like 6 or 7 years ago that nobody ever met by video. We were doing Skype audio calls, remember? And now it's like, if you're going to meet with someone, of course you're meeting on video. It's just, but I remember, I think all of us lived through that time where it was like, oh, this meeting's happening on video, but video is a lot more personal. You have eye contact, you can read body language, you can see the person you're talking to. So that is a big change that's happened since digital marketing sort of became a thing, right?
Sure.
And I think the other thing, honestly, and this is the sign of maturity that's most exciting for me, is that I think that people have finely tuned BS meters in a way that they did not have in the early years. So, people have seen a lot of snake oil salesmen online and a lot of, big, ridiculous promises. And I think at this point, people are like, yeah, no, I'm not buying that, And that's a good thing. That's a good thing because people now are seeing this digital space like any other space where you use your own criteria and your own life experience and empirical evidence to sort of say, yeah, no, I'm not buying that. That's a lot of hyperbole, and I'm not buying that, right? So I think that is such a healthy thing. People are recognizing when they're being sold down the river and they're not buying it. So it's a wonderful opportunity for those of us who really are genuinely interested in the success of our customers to communicate with them in a way that it feels personal, that exudes the fact that we really are interested in their success, and that helps them to see a future that's better than their present without a lot of hyperbole.
Yeah, so I think maybe to talk through the phases, there was a little bit of spray and pray going on in digital marketing, right? Let's just throw as much crap up against the wall and something's going to
We
stick
don't know
somewhere.
what's going to work, but something will.
Yeah, but I got a lot of hits on my website, right?
Right,
and I think what you're
exactly.
saying now, it's more about creating that connection. Where we're going is people are going to read through all this stuff. Their junk mail is going to go to their junk mail, or maybe not even going to see it. And it's the connection. How do you create a connection with your audience in a fashion that is repeatable? It creates high margin sales on a repeatable basis using online marketing. Is that the right way to understand that?
That's
Okay.
a great summary. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So knowing all of that, what is, we maybe asked the same questions in a few different ways, which is, okay, what are the biggest mistakes people made? And what's the success, something that should be doing? But when you meet with companies and you start looking at their platforms and you want to help them move to the next step of creating these tighter relationships and higher margin sales, do you perform basically a full assessment of their marketing business and come back to them with a plan of attack? Or what's your approach specifically? Is there an assessment that you do as an example for small businesses, or how do you go approach that?
I have a very brief, it's literally a 1-minute assessment on my consulting page. So I do have that people can go through and sort of, it's really a self-assessment. It's a series of very quick questions where they can say, okay, this is what I need, this is what I want to focus on, and all of that. So that's available. It depends outside of that very much on what people are bringing me in for and what they need help with. In some cases, I have a client right now that was like, the CMO needed to focus on a different area of the business and basically said, can you run marketing for the next 6 months? So in that case, I really did need to sit down and build out a whole strategy and understand their goals and where they wanted to go and what they wanted their team members to step into and all of that. So in some cases, it's very comprehensive. In other cases, it's a more limited engagement because they're building a new brand and they need help figuring out what to call it and what the tagline is going to be and how they can use it in the marketplace and how they can position themselves and all of that. So in some cases it's a more targeted engagement, and in some cases it's big. And I like both, honestly. I wouldn't want to do just one or the other.
The first book you wrote, Master Content Marketing, a simple strategy to cure the blank page blues and attract a profitable audience. What is the most often comment that you hear from your readers as to the value that they get?
Oh my gosh, you just handed me that question on a silver platter. That's awesome. So the biggest thing that I hear from readers is they say, now I feel confident creating my content. I get it. I know how to do it. And oftentimes they are people who didn't think that they could write and definitely didn't think that they could publish their writing online where everyone could see it. That seemed impossible to them. And what I do in that book is I break down content marketing into 7 essential elements, and I explain to people element by element what their goals are and how to make that piece of the content really work, all the way from the headline to the call to action. I literally have a chapter about every one of those 7 elements. So there's a whole chapter on the first sentence of your piece of content, for example, because that's often where people are deciding whether or not they're going to continue to read or continue to watch or continue to listen. So that book has really helped people to figure out how to get content crafted. And it's very much of like a puzzle piece approach. Like if you can get all of these puzzle pieces optimized, you'll have a fantastic piece of content.
Pamela, you know that you cannot say a number of something on the Entrepreneurs United podcast and not have Rich ask you to list the entire set of the 7 components, because as soon as Rich hears a number of something, he needs to know exactly what's in it. So Rich, go ahead, ask the question.
So Pamela, I was just thinking, random question. Would you happen to be able to share with us at least the title of the 7 essentials?
I can share them, and you can let me know which one you want to hear more about. But,
Great.
yeah, totally have them memorized at this point. So it starts with a headline, and the goal of the headline really is to get people to click through and even consider consuming your piece of content, either listening to it like on a podcast, watching it like on a video, or reading it if it's a blog post. So the headline is what gets the click. The first sentence, or the first sentence you say, for example, the first sentence you write on a blog post, the first sentence you say on a video or a podcast, is where you are going to begin drawing people in and getting them excited about what they're about to consume. And then we have the introduction paragraph or paragraphs. I call it the introduction section. And this is, you are still kind of selling the piece of content at this point. You are telling people what they're about to learn, what they're about to experience, what they're about to understand better or discover. And then we go into the subheads. And the subheads are really important. The subheads are where you are going to spell out what is inside that piece of content. For all the people who are just skimming through, you're going to give them the basics of what they're going to find out in that content. What do subheads look like on a podcast? On a podcast or on a video, they may be like these divider sections. A lot of longer podcasts have breaks built into them. And so you'll have a section that you'll go into after the break, for example. So that is kind of like a subhead in a podcast. In a video, we see the same thing. You might see a slide come across to introduce the next section. Those dividers are really helpful because if somebody is kind of skimming through and deciding whether or not they want to stick with the content, that's going to tell them whether or not they want to consume it. YouTube now has chapters. So our videos have chapters, and those chapters are like subheads on a blog post. So there are lots of ways to think about these subheads, but they're a way to divide up your content. The other piece of your content is what I call the main copy. It's basically everything that is not a headline, a first sentence, an introduction section, or a subhead. It's like the bulk of your content. It's the meat of your information or the inspiration that you're sharing. And then at the very end, there's a section that nobody talks about, but I think a really great piece of content has this, and it's a summary. It's where you say, okay, this is what we covered today. These are the main points. This is the takeaway I want you to remember. People are busy, people are skimming. And so if you can give them a quick summary at the end, they're going to probably retain more of what they learned from your piece of content. And then the very last element is the call to action. And the call to action is super important if you're creating content marketing, because if it's actually content marketing, then the call to action is the part that actually makes it marketing, because you're asking people to sign up for something, to potentially purchase something, to take another step in that buyer process. If you don't have a call to action, what you have is a piece of content. If you add a call to action, then you have a piece of content marketing. Does that make sense?
Excellent. I just want to summarize real quick, if I may.
Yes.
So you've got the headline, that's the initial thing people read, and you want them to consider consuming it. The first sentence, you want to draw them in to keep reading. In the intro section is really about telling them what value they're going to get if they keep reading.
Yes.
Then you've got, of course, subheads that just divide how to consume the main copy if they want to skip ahead.
Mm-hmm.
In the summary, you tell them what you told them, and then there's a call to action. Is that a synopsis of what I just heard?
You're a good fast learner.
Okay.
Yes, that's it. So the subhead and the main copy they kind of form the bulk of your piece of content. But yes, that's it in a nutshell. And each of those elements has slightly different goals. So one of the things that I did in this book is I just kind of broke it down and gave people best practices, lots of headline templates, lots of ways to think about those different sections. I also talk about breaking your copy into bullets if you're doing written copy to make it easier to skim. The big thing that I found is that people read very differently online than they do when they're reading a book. And so you need to think about the way you structure your information differently if you want people to actually consume it.
I'd love to skip ahead in the subheadings you gave us for the 7 essential elements. And I want to read call to action. What is one thing as it relates as a call to action that you can offer anyone who's writing content that it's a must do when it comes to a call to action?
The biggest thing that you need to remember about a call to action is to include it, because you would not believe how many people create this amazing piece of content and then they just put it on the shelf and walk away from it. And they don't ask people to take any kind of action. There are all sorts of calls to action. I like to call, some are kind of like soft calls to action and some are hard calls to action, right? So a soft call to action might be share this on social media if you enjoyed it. Back in the day, people used to leave comments on blog posts. They don't do that so much anymore, but you might say leave a comment, or like I said, share it on social, or if it's a podcast episode, you could say, give this podcast episode a rating, or let me know what you liked about it, something like that. So that's more like a feedback, soft call to action. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have, if you're ready to take the next step, go to this page and apply for my program, or click this button and buy what I've been talking about in this episode, something like that. So it runs the gamut. You don't have to ask people to buy something every time, but you do need to ask them to take some kind of action.
Got it. Thanks for that. And then fast forward a year and a half after you published that book, you publish a second book. What was the first book missing that required an entire second book?
Yeah, I love it. It wasn't so much what it was missing. It was more like people who graduated from master content marketing.
It was more about graduated learning than it was missing something.
It was, so people were coming to me going, okay, I know how to create content now, but how often should I be publishing? Where should I be publishing? What does my content need to look like? And I realized that there's kind of a life cycle to content marketing especially when you're using content on a website. In your first year of creating content on a brand new website, your goal needs to be to let search engines know what you are an expert on, what people can come to your website to find. And so you really need to publish at least once a week, really great high quality posts. And the other thing is you need to publish that often because you need to get better at creating content. So you or whoever on your team is creating content, who's creating content, is going to get better at it if they do it on a weekly basis. So that first year, weekly publishing makes a lot of sense. Once you're in year 2, you might have 50 to 100 pieces of content on your website. At that point, you can slow your pace just a little bit and start focusing on creating higher quality content. So maybe you add graphics to your content if they're blog posts or videos, or if you have a podcast, let's say, and you've done all audio content, maybe in year 2, you start doing video and audio. So at this point, you're an experienced content creator and you can kind of up the ante and go for higher quality. And then once you hit about year 6, this is in my experience, around year 6, you've been doing this consistently for 6 years. And at this point, you have a ton of content, right? Some of it has performed really well, and some of it was just another notch in your belt of experience, right? Like you just created another piece of content, maybe it wasn't a huge hit, right? So at that point, you almost become like a reference librarian. And what you're trying to do is to help people to find the most valuable, best converting content on your site. So you need to do some things on your website that help to highlight the content that really works to build your business. So all of that is what I put in that second book, because people who were just learning to create content weren't really ready to know that. But once they understood how to create content, then it was about strategy. So that's why I wrote Master Content Strategy.
Well, I'll tell you, my daughter is starting to write content and was inspired by another one of our podcast guests. I will tell you, at a minimum, you at least sold 2 books here, because I'm going to buy your books and I'm going to give them to her. If somebody like my daughter specifically wanted to get a hold of you and learn more about what you do and what you can offer them on content creating and marketing in the digital world, how would they go about getting a hold of you?
You know, I grabbed my name on the internet last year, so it's very easy. People can find me. PamelaWilson.com.
Okay.
It's just my name, Pamela Wilson.com. And I tend to put all the best stuff right on my homepage. So you can just go to the homepage and you'll find whatever goodie I have currently on that homepage. And it's pretty easy to navigate around and find what you're interested in. And I have 12 years of content on that website. So there's a lot of free information there. I have a YouTube channel now, so lots of good stuff that people can dive into.
Well, thank you so much for the conversation today. I know lots of our entrepreneurs are getting value out of it.
This has been delightful. You two ask amazing questions, and I so hope that it was interesting for your listeners.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
John, I gotta say, I am not surprised that I do it, but I'm surprised you called me out.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If somebody gives a number, Rich is gonna dig in. I totally am. I never even thought oh, I guess that's my thing. And we usually get something really good, especially when we're talking to authors or keynote speakers, because they know, in this case, she knew the 7 essential elements. There aren't 8. There aren't 5. There are 7. It's finite. She's refined it. She's thought about it. There's a reason they're exclusively 7. And I loved her advice on the call to action. Just include it. And if you want a little bit more, you can have a soft call or a hard call.
Yeah, I'll stay with where you are there. One thing that I've learned is what the 7 elements are is the framework really behind her book, right? And when you think about frameworks, Stephen Covey had the 7 habits of highly effective people. And whenever you create a framework around something, it really ties your learning to it. I'm sure we would learn a lot of other things if we read her book, but the one thing you won't forget if you want to create good content are the 7 elements. And here's the framework of the understanding. So really love that. And when you think about the elements too, Rich, I was thinking about it's not just written content. She mentioned as well, when you do a podcast and you're going on YouTube, you could have chapters, which are subheadings of what you're trying to create and what your headline is and what your opening is. And it had me reflecting even on our own content. Are we following these 7 elements, and how can we better follow them to assist our viewers or listeners to find exactly what they're looking for? So I really love that component, which brought us all the way back to the beginning. A lot of times businesses focus on a buyer persona that is everybody. I have a product, I'm trying to sell absolutely everybody. So then when you go to their website, you see a whole bunch of stuff all over the place and you go, this isn't really what I'm looking for, because you're not really sure. But then you have these companies right now that are doing a phenomenal job knowing exactly who their audience is, targeting their content exactly to that audience. So when they do show up on their social and their websites, they're like, oh, this is exactly where I need to be. I think that's where Pamela can help companies really zero in on who is your customer and what are you trying to sell to them. Don't worry about vanity. Don't worry about all this traffic that you're getting. Worry about how you're converting your customers to margin sales in a very structured manner versus spending all your money on just getting traffic. Love that approach.
Well, and speaking of that, when she was talking about knowing your numbers, which is where you were recapping there, it was very interesting because I was reflecting on yours and my training 25 years ago, where you knew the number of leads, you knew how many converted into an estimate, you knew how many estimates converted into a sale, and you knew job size of your sale. That was down pat. It was not questionable. That's how you run a business. Those are the levers. And I think as we've matured, correct me if I'm wrong, as we've matured in business, those levers have not changed. However, you know what she brought up that we actually don't look at probably enough is lead to booked dollars. We track all of the lead to estimate, estimate to landed to average job size. But just to go, what's the average lead that I get from this source? How much money am I booking? And that's an interesting thing. I want to play with that after we get off air here on what that could mean for our business. And she's obviously advocating for that type of thinking when it comes to digital marketing.
Yeah, and in certain businesses, Rich, it's not only to book dollar, but it's how much margin you made from that sale. And this goes back to a conversation we had. You would remember the guest, but it's like, I could sell this microphone and maybe I'm making 10-point margins, or I could sell my ebook and I can make 100% margin.
That was Tom Antion, who Kinley's working with.
Exactly, right? So sometimes what kind of marketing programs you're doing is selling what product and what margin. Do more of that and create higher margin sales. And I think, to go back to everything you're saying, I think if you still look at it from an ROI perspective, I put $100 into this digital marketing campaign. Ultimately, how much margin did I make from that $100 on that specific campaign, driving to this specific website, to create this specific lead, to create this specific sale? I think that practice still exists. And what I love about digital marketing and the reason why I think it's so important to have a consultant, whether it be Pamela Wilson or anybody else, doesn't matter. Obviously love Pamela and I think entrepreneurship consult her if they need help, is if you spent $1,000, you could generate $10,000 in sales, how many $1,000 would you spend? Unlimited. I'd spend as many as I can. If I knew every 1,000 is going to get me 10,000, but the magic is trying to figure out what works. And sometimes in digital marketing, there's so much data that people just throw money at it. They get tons of data, but they don't know how to really measure it. And I think knowing your numbers was the key point. She said, you got to know your numbers, not just your website visitors. You need to know your conversion, your margins by campaign, and everything else. And that's where it gets very cumbersome for small businesses.
John, you just acted as a consultant for me in the first thing you said in your reply, which is you're right on looking at lead to gross margin dollars, not just booked dollars. And as I was thinking about what I said, we do look at ROI on a lead source. I'm not sure I've seen any spreadsheet that tracks lead source to gross margin dollars. That's very next level thinking, and I appreciate that.
You're welcome. But you can thank Pamela Wilson for that, because that's all a result of this conversation and how you start thinking about things differently and how you and I can learn from all these expert guests we bring on our episodes.